Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at Noon, one man has been killed and more than 50 are missing, feared dead, after a Korean fishing boat sinks in icy waters off Russia's far eastern coast. Crude oil prices bounce back as much as 5% from 5-year lows as depressed oil prices begin eating into US shale output. First responding to a wave of anger following the fatal shooting of a black teenager by a white police officer, US President Barack Obama vows to boost public trust in the police. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
It's Noon Tuesday here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. And we start this lunchtime with news that over 50 people are feared dead after a Korean fishing vessel sank into the icy depths of the Bering Sea off Russia's far eastern coast.
Right, rescuers are desperately combing the area where the boat went down, but they've yet to find any trace of the missing crewmen. Park Ji-won has the latest.
Korea's foreign ministry said Tuesday morning that no more people had been rescued overnight. Around the time of the sinking on Monday afternoon local time, 8 people on a small life raft were rescued by a nearby ship. 1 Russian, 3 Filipinos, 3 Indonesians, and 1 Korean. But the Korean crewman later died of hypothermia. Officials say the crew of the Eoh 501 was made up of 35 Indonesians, 13 Filipinos, 11 Koreans, and 1 Russian. 52 people are still missing. Rescue operations are said to be ongoing, but weather and water conditions are making search efforts very difficult. The owner of the trawler, Seoul Industries, says that while the exact cause of the sinking is not yet known, it's believed that the boat began to list sharply after high winds and choppy waters caused seawater to flood its storage holds. The boat, built in 1978, was bought by Seoul Industries from a Spanish company in 2010. Industry experts say vessels that have been in operation for more than 20 years are at greater risk of sinking than newer ones. The Eoh 501 left Korea's southern port city of Busan in July to fish for pollock in the Bering Sea. The boat was scheduled to return to Busan this month. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Global crude oil prices, which had been on a downward spiral in recent months, took a turn and hit their biggest daily gains in 2 years on Monday. The rise comes as fears mount that U.S. shale production may be on a downward trend. Hwang Jie has the latest.
U.S. oil rebounded from a 5-year low, rising more than 4% on Monday. Crude finished up nearly $3 or 4.3% at $69 per barrel. That marks the largest daily gain since August 2012. The benchmark Brent crude also jumped roughly 3.5% to finish at $72.54 per barrel, its biggest one-day gain in 2 years. The rise in international oil prices comes as investors look for a bottom price after OPEC decided not to trim production last week. U.S. and Brent crude have dropped for 5 straight months, the longest downward spiral since the 2008 financial crisis. The prices have lost 40% compared to their peak in June. But new data also shows that the market is rising back up as the U.S. shale oil industry responds to the tumbling oil prices. In late Monday afternoon trading on Wall Street, shares of shale energy companies extended their losing streak for a second consecutive session, dropping around 5%. OPEC's dominance in the oil market has been under threat in the face of growing output from Russia and shale oil production in the U.S. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, ahead of the rebound, global oil prices dropped nearly 8% in November from the previous year, and the falling cost of crude led consumer prices in Korea to grow at their slowest pace in 9 months in November, renewing concerns the country might be sliding toward deflation. Statistics Korea says that prices rose 1% last month from a year earlier, with core inflation, which excludes highly volatile oil and food prices, standing at 1.6%, the slowest on-year increase in 15 months. Global oil prices dropped nearly 8% in November from a year earlier. As I mentioned, a government official told Korea's Yonhap News that a near $2 rise in cigarette prices next year should help pull the nation's inflation rate into the 2% range. Now, the prolonged fall in oil prices is giving Korea's airline industry a much-needed boost. The significant rise in the number of Koreans ordering goods from overseas is also helping the nation's main carriers bring in some extra funds after a slow start to the year. Kim Min-ji reports.
Tumbling oil prices and the rise of direct purchasing from overseas could give Korea's struggling airline industry the shot in the arm it needs. The decline in crude prices has led to an overall reduction in costs for airlines, which means they're able to entice customers with cheaper fares and cut rates for cargo deliveries. Korean Air, the nation's #1 carrier, says it has saved nearly $120 million this year thanks to the drop in oil prices. Jet fuel on the Singapore market was selling at $126 a barrel early this year, but its value was plunged by around a third to $84 as of Monday. Korea's low-cost carriers have also been benefiting as fuel expenses account for 45% of their overall operating costs. Falling oil prices also means lower fuel surcharges, which in turn means more passengers and more cargo. According to Korea's Transport Ministry, nearly 7.5 million passengers took flights in, out, and around Korea in October. That's more than 15% higher than the same month last year. Cargo volume also jumped 5% over the same period. And with increased shipments due to the shopping holiday known as Black Friday, Korean Air has deployed an additional 26 cargo planes. However, industry watchers warn that oil prices and exchange rates can quickly turn on their head, especially given the ongoing uncertainties in some advanced economies. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And in other news, President Park Geun-hye is currently meeting with her Unification Preparatory Committee for a checkup on the progress that's been made since the committee was launched earlier this year. It is the president's third meeting with committee members who are briefing her on what's been accomplished so far and the plans for next year. These include major inter-Korean projects, new ways to provide humanitarian aid to North Korea, and potential sites to build a peace park in the demilitarized zone. While Seoul continues to prepare for the costly process of unification, Pyongyang's repeated provocations and nuclear ambitions have kept the two sides from renewing dialogue.
After months of tough negotiations, lawmakers appear set to pass next year's budget bill this afternoon. Both of the main parties made compromises along the way, and they still have some differences to resolve before the day out. But the main stumbling blocks to an agreement have now been overcome. Ji Myung-gil has the details.
Having narrowed their differences on a number of issues, Korea's two main rival parties have agreed to pass next year's $340 billion budget at Tuesday's plenary session. The ruling Saenuri Party and opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy have agreed to allocate some $85 million for President Park Geun-hye's vision of a creative economy. They agreed to subsidize a free childcare program using the Education Ministry's budget and to scale back on corporate tax reductions. They've also accepted the government's proposal to increase cigarette prices by an average of $1.80 per pack starting next year. However, the parties are still at loggerheads over tax-related bills attached to the 2015 budget. The ruling Saenuri Party is calling for tax breaks for companies that increase investments, wages, and dividend payments instead of sitting on piles of cash reserves. The move is in line with the government policies aimed at fueling domestic consumption. But the opposition party says unnecessary tax cuts are being given to local companies. If an agreement isn't reached on the tax-related issues, the two parties plan to vote on them separately as auxiliary bills. Regardless of that outcome, the National Assembly is set to pass next year's budget Tuesday. If and when they do, it will mark the first time they've passed a budget by the legal deadline in 12 years. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Seoul and Washington are in the final stages of revising a civilian nuclear cooperation deal, but it's unclear if an agreement will be reached before the end of this year. Negotiations have been ongoing for more than 4 years over the Nuclear Energy Pact, which dates all the way back to 1974. It bans Seoul from enriching uranium or reprocessing spent fuel, but Seoul has asked that those restrictions be lifted, much in the same way as Japan has been allowed to undertake such procedures. Washington remains reluctant to give Korea the okay, though, due to concerns over proliferation. South Korea has said it wants an agreement reached by the end of 2014 to allow enough time for parliamentary approval and other procedures that have to be gone through. The pact was scheduled to expire last March, but was pushed back to March 2016. After the two countries failed to come to an agreement. Now, earlier this year, the U.S. state of Virginia passed and signed into law a bill requiring school textbooks to refer to the body of water between Korea and Japan as the Korean name East Sea, as well as Sea of Japan. Delegate Mark Broome led the historic change, and he sat down with our Hwang Sang-hee during his recent trip to Seoul.
When they saw that name designated in a way that brings back those historic inaccuracies, they realized that the best thing that they could do is ask for a redress of this body here.
He led the efforts to let the students in the U.S. state of Virginia know that the body of water between Korea and Japan is not only known as the Sea of Japan, but also the East Sea. Despite criticisms that a global issue had waded into local politics and into school textbooks, Virginia House District Delegate Mark Broome said the bill was a domestic issue.
Korea and U.S. is building and increasing our trade opportunities. If we have Virginia kids growing up and possibly having a job that allows them to travel to Korea, we want them to understand there are some disputes. We don't want them walking in blindly and finding out that they're taught one version when they're dealing with Korean business people.
The bill, which was passed and signed into law earlier this year, was a small victory for Korea in a centuries-old feud with Japan. Kim does not plan to introduce more history-related bills, but says a similar campaign can always be replicated.
So many issues that we deal with in America, we need Korean American voices there, and right now that's not being heard. So I'm hoping that this experience of passing the EC bill will give them that motivation and a roadmap to say this is exactly what we want to do. We want to go to our government and redress our grievances with them the way the Constitution promises it.
The Korean community is growing. I think its number is somewhere around 2 million. How can we get a more prominent presence in the U.S.?
We don't have anybody in Congress that's advocating for peace, reunification, hostility to be withdrawn in North Korea, human rights issues that are happening. Nobody who's of our background speaking on those issues in Washington, D.C. So I think unless and until we have Korean Americans that are affecting our policies at the national level, I don't think we can say that we're quite there yet.
Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
And let's now get to some global headlines we're following this hour. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, U.S. President Barack Obama is trying to bridge strained relations between the police and the African-American community in the U.S. amid the fallout from those racially charged protests in Ferguson and across the U.S. Where the U.S. is at right now, it seems mighty ambitious, but he has outlined a starting point.
Indeed, he has, Mark. He spent Monday meeting with civil rights leaders and members of the police force, and in an expression of commitment to see the problem through, the White House announced a special task force and a multi-million-dollar modern policing program to help bridge that divide. Our Eoh Jin-joo breaks it down for us.
Inside the White House on Monday, President Barack Obama held a series of meetings focused on what can be learned from the situation in Ferguson.
When any part of the American family does not feel like it is being treated fairly, that's a problem for all of us.
America continues to react to the Ferguson grand jury decision to not indict white police officer Darren Wilson in the fatal shooting of unarmed black teenager Michael Brown. In response, President Obama is calling for a 3-year, $263 million spending package to reform policing in the U.S. This package would include expanded police training programs with $75 million set aside to buy 50,000 body cameras for police officers. The president is also setting up a special task force chaired by a police commissioner and a university professor.
They are going to co-chair a task force that is not only going to reach out and listen to law enforcement, community activists, other stakeholders, but is going to report to me specifically in 90 days with concrete recommendations, including best practices for communities where law enforcement and neighborhoods are working well together.
Those at the meeting said the president seemed serious about bridging deeply rooted divisions. The NFL said Monday that it will not punish the St. Louis Rams players who on Sunday walked onto the field with their hands raised, mimicking those who protested the Michael Brown shooting with hands up, don't shoot gestures. The St. Louis Police Officers Association said the gesture was, quote, tasteless, offensive, and inflammatory, and it demanded an apology. Eoh Jin-joo, Arirang News.
Falling oil prices has translated into a currency tumble for Russia, the world's second largest oil exporter. The ruble fell 9% against the U.S. dollar on Monday, recording its biggest one-day fall since 1998, before a suspected central bank intervention. The Russian currency is down nearly 40% against the greenback since January, while oil prices have dipped by more than a third since summer. Oil and gas accounts for half of Moscow's government revenues and 70% of the country's exports. And finally, the World Health Organization is reporting progress in the fight against Ebola in West Africa. In a situation report on Monday, Assistant Director General Dr. Bruce Aylward said 2 of the 3 hardest-hit countries, Liberia and Guinea, are on track with containment goals, having isolated and treated 70% of people sick with the contagious disease and safely buried the Ebola dead. He said Sierra Leone, however, was seeing a rise in cases in an area near the capital of Freetown. He cautioned much more work was needed to reach 0 cases in all 3 countries, which make up 99% of the world's Ebola cases.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11.
The Hollywood comedy The Interview, which is about a CIA plot to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, is set to hit U.S. screens on Christmas Day. And Sony Pictures, which produced the movie, has become the victim of a cyber attack, which many believe may have been carried out by the North. So could it be that North Korea has acted on its threats over the movie that depicts its leader as the butt of the joke? Our Shin Se-min reports.
You want us to kill the leader of North Korea?
Yes.
What?
When the trailer for the Hollywood movie The Interview was released earlier this year, North Korea made it very clear they weren't happy about it.
Seriously? Okay.
We're going to North Korea! They called the comedy, which centers around a CIA plot to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, a wanton act of terror, and even penned a letter to the United Nations to complain. Could they have escalated their attack on the movie through an actual cyber attack? The online networks of Sony Pictures, which produced The Interview, went down last week. Employees of the company found themselves locked out of their computers, which showed the phrase hacked by GOP, or the Guardians of Peace, which was claimed responsibility for the attack. It's been costly for Sony. At least 5 of the company's films, 4 of which haven't been released yet, were leaked online, costing Sony tens of millions of dollars in damages. In response, Sony said the theft of content was considered a criminal matter and that they're working to address the issue. The FBI is investigating, and many are wondering whether North Korea could have had a hand in it, with the interview set to be released on Christmas Day in the U.S. The North has so far refused to deny any involvement. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Women in Korea are less likely to be in work than their counterparts in other developed countries around the world. This due to the difficulty achieving the right balance, really, between their work and private life. The government, however, recognises the problems many women face and is attempting to turn the tide more in their favour. Our Gonsoa reports.
Report about how the average Korean woman is almost forced to choose between her career.
While more women are entering the workforce here in Korea, the glass ceiling certainly remains.
Lack of economic participation by women in Korea.
The problems Korean women face in the world of work seem to hit the headlines on almost a daily basis. Experts say that while women have the education and skills to flourish in the labor market, societal issues and family circumstances often stand in their way. As women in Korea are expected to outnumber men next year for the first time ever, domestic and international leaders are emphasizing now more than ever the importance of raising the labor participation rate of women. This was stressed at a conference on Monday, where international heads said Korea's job market needs to become more flexible towards women, referring to the country's long working hours and difficulties faced by those returning from maternity leave. They, however, said it's a good thing that the Korean government is very committed to the issue.
The government has been developing diverse policies to support women to maintain their career while keeping work-life balance. One of these core policies is the family-friendly cooperation certification.
That policy gives incentives to family-friendly companies, making more quality part-time positions available and providing assistance to female re-employment support centers were also mentioned. International leaders say the Korean government's goal of raising the female labor participation rate to 70% in 2017 from the current 55% is ambitious but attainable.
The country has extremely highly educated pool of educated women, which is a very good baseline to start. Secondly, it has very clear policies, not only policies, but plans how to get there. And I think now it's just a matter of implementation.
Gonsoa, Arirang News.
Now, electric cars that run on batteries are considered among the most environmentally friendly vehicles you can get, since they don't emit any nasty gases out of their tailpipes. But new research suggests that the issue is not as black and white as it seems in Korea, at the least, according to a report by the Korea Finance Corporation. When we consider the electricity used to charge a car's battery, carbon emissions translate to 86 grams per kilometre on the road. And while that's lower than the 107 grams emitted by the compact but gasoline-powered Chevrolet Spark, it's only about 20% less. That's because Korea generates nearly 70% of its electricity through the burning of fossil fuels, meaning electric vehicles, while greener than their gasoline-powered counterparts, are still emitting carbon every time they are plugged in.
It's a cold, icy day today, and a cold wave advisory has been issued in many regions, including the capital area, and heavy snow advisory is still in place for some parts of the Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces, with up to 10 centimeters of more snow expected throughout the day. Now, people in northern areas don't just have to worry about the frigid conditions, but also a high level of yellow dust, which is expected to remain very high till the midday. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. Now, the daily high in Seoul will only rise to -1, while Daegu peaks at 3, and Gwangju and Busan will top out at 2 and 5, respectively. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island will get up to 5, while Daejeon and Dokdo see highs of 1 and 0. Now, there's a chance of late night snow in the Seoul metropolitan area, which could lead to icy roads tomorrow morning, and the cold snap will persist throughout the week, so please stay bundled up. Now, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And that does it for this Tuesday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Join us again at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.